Hi, everyone. This is Trish Kendall with Choose and Become for another Trish Kendall Speaks episode. So, books are an incredibly important part of uh, my world and my husband's world and my kids. We love to read books. And oftentimes I'll record a Trish Kendall Speaks where you'll see I'm in my office and there is bookshelves with a whole bunch of books and we call it our little library. We all still like um, uh, paper books. Huh, the Magician's Daughter. I even read things that are for adolescents and pre-adolescents because my kids read them and like them. Uh, so, an interesting thing for me about books is when I was growing up, I don't actually remember reading. I know that I read Little House on the Prairie or I watched the shows. So, I actually don't even know if I read the books. And I know that I read books in school, but because of, well, I'm going to say because of the trauma that was going on as a child and then moving so much. So it wasn't even that I was experiencing sexual abuse chronically. So it was very much a part of my life. And then that was compounded with, uh, there were often times that my dad was incredibly volatile and verbally violent and sometimes even physically violent. And so the walking on eggshells and not knowing what was going on. And then the third, compounding issue was that I moved around a ton and we moved around and I was always new at school and I was, always the poor kid and not pretty. And, I look like a boy with my short haircut and crooked teeth and all this stuff, right? I'm sure I read because I went to school and I graduated high school barely. And so there were books, but I don't remember reading and I don't remember the stories or the experiences. Fast forward, I probably didn't really start reading and enjoying reading novels, historical fictions. I love historical fiction, and even nonfiction, some nonfiction. I didn't really start that until I was probably in my early 30s, maybe even mid 30s, because enter Joe. So Joe has always loved books, and his parents have always fed him and his sister books, fiction, nonfiction, uh, lit, you know, literary. I don't even know what you call them. And Joe has always loved to read, and he was an English lit major in school, and he loved Shakespeare, and he studied Shakespeare, and all the things. So he's always read. And when we were dating, we were on again, off again. I think most of my community knows that we were on again, off again because of all the crap that I put us through. This episode is not about that. But one of the times we were together, it's the first time he wrote me a letter and I was going on a trip out of the country and he was watching my cat, Smokey the cat. Smokey the cat was staying with Joe. And he wrote me a letter before I left. And uh, I still have it. And it's the most beautiful thing. And it's the first time that he told me that he loved me. But the way that he did it was through speaking about the characters of the books that he has read. And in his letter, he talks about some of the characters of the books, but that he had never, through all the pages that he's ever read, has he met a character as um, unique and captivating and one of a kind as Trish Trout at the time. And it was such a beautiful letter, and I've kept it forever. And if I find it, I'll actually maybe share it with the community a little bit. So books have always been, and characters in books and have always been a part of Joe's life. And so when we moved in together, when we got engaged and he moved into my condo, the only thing that he brought really besides his clothes were all of his books. And we went to IKEA and we got a bookshelf and he built a bookshelf and he created this beautiful bookshelf with all of his books. And then I had some of my little pictures on there of me and my marathon girlfriends and me and my sister and my niece and my nephew and my mom. And so we made this, and it just all of a sudden turned my condo into a home. And I wrote a blog about that, about creating a home through the books, putting the books on the bookshelf. Well, fast forward, I love reading. I love reading. I don't even watch any shows. I don't watch shows on Netflix. I don't watch shows on Amazon. Maybe I'll watch a movie every once in a while when I'm on a plane when my brain is just fried. But I just read all the time. And I read from uh, Lily's fantasy smut books, which I love. I love them. I love them. I love them. And that's just pure pleasure. So I read that, but all the way to nonfiction books. I am reading Embracing Defeat right now, about Japan after World War II. That doesn't quite keep my attention the way the fantasy smut does, but I still enjoy it. And every time Joe recommends a book to me, because he knows what I love now, I always read it. And then when his dad recommends a book to me, I always read that too. And so the next book on my list is Immortal's Rules of Civility, because I loved The Gentleman in Moscow. And then Table for Two has just come out, but I haven't read Rules of Civility, so that's on my list. And then the book that I just got done reading, which I had never read before ever, is The Catcher in the Rye. And I do not think that we read this in high school, although I know some high schools do. In fact, Lily, who's going into ninth grade, The Catcher in the Rye is on her reading list. They're going to read it in English literature. So Joe and his dad and I were sitting outside for our Friday evening date nights, and we always talk about books. We always talk about the books that we're reading, and we swap books and things like that. Which, by the way, just as a side note, it's amazing to me that I can engage in conversation with them about the books that I like and the books that I don't like and the characters that I like and the things that I thought were interesting. And because again, it was just until I was in my mid 30s, I didn't even read this stuff. And there's so much to read in so little time. So Joe was telling his dad that The Catcher in the Rye is what Lily's going to read. I was like, oh, well, I've never read that. And many times this has happened, but Joe and his dad are like, oh. And then, of course, Joe realizes, um, there's so much that I didn't experience. Well, The Catcher in the Rye is one of his favorite books ever. And when Joe reads a book, he always writes the date that he read it. And so you'll see if he read the book multiple times. And so he'll have JPK for Joseph Paul Kendall with the date that he read it, and Catcher in the Rye he's read twice. Um, and he said, you got to read it. I'm not going to tell you anything about it. Let's talk about it when you're done. And so I read it in 2 days over the weekend. And when I was first reading it, I was like, where is this going? I thought it was a little shaky, a little raw, a little, I couldn't quite relate to Holden Caulfield, the protagonist, the narrator, the main character. It's Holden telling a story of 2 days in his life. And I'm sure everybody that's listening to this, most people have read The Catcher in the Rye, but for those of you who haven't, you should read it. And so I'm reading this and I'm thinking, I'm not sure I can really relate to 16-year-old, 17-year-old Holden uh, getting kicked out of an all boys private school for the second time. And then, but I knew I was going to keep reading it because Joe was like, you got to read it and let's talk when it's done. And so, I kept hanging on, and then it was so multi-layered, and I almost felt like the author gave little gifts, like laid out little gifts all the way through the book, and they just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and they just led you through this experience. And I can see why people read it twice, because I will have a totally different experience reading The Catcher in the Rye the second time I read it than I did my first. And I found myself just feeling and hurting and with Holden, because he was so lonely and he had no community and he had lost love, and he was a train wreck. And you don't know that at the beginning, or I didn't know he was a complete train wreck at the beginning. And it just starts to he starts to unravel more and unravel more and unravel more, and you're going along this journey and you're like, oh my God, this poor kid, this poor boy. And what I'm thinking about is this boy who has no love in his life except his younger brother and his younger sister. And then the storylines, tight storylines. Like, this is a short book, but the storylines that show that love. And so I related to Holden in a different way, not a 16-year-old boy getting kicked out of private school, all boys private school, but no community, uh, the loss of love, unraveling to a place of, um, you know, anything's better than life. I digressed with The Catcher in the Rye, but it hit me hard. And at the very end of the book, and it was like a Saturday morning. I'm drinking my coffee and I finish reading this book and I am just bawling my eyes out. And I just have been holding on to Holden for the last week. And I've been thinking about him, and I've been thinking about his little sister, and I've been thinking about his journey. And I feel like The Catcher in the Rye was a gift to me right now as a 51-year-old woman reading it. I'm sure Lily, as a 14-year-old girl reading The Catcher in the Rye, I don't know what she's going to think. She's probably going to be like, what is this? What are they talking about? I have no idea how she is going to react to this book. For me, today was the right time to read it. Now was the right time to embrace it. And I feel like it was a gift given to me. So books are an incredibly important part of my life. Lily reads all the time. Sam, when he does read, he loves it, but he doesn't read as much as me, Lily, and Joe. And I've always promised Lily that for as long as she reads, I will buy her books. I will just buy her books. I don't care. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, it doesn't matter. I will just buy her books. And the last thing on that is, when Joe and I were dating, he brought me to Boston. I was living in Chicago. He brought me to Boston to meet his sister and his parents. And at some point on that trip, we went to Barnes and Noble with his dad and his sister. And, Joe was getting his master's at the time. I was already working. I had already been working forever. So that's what I did, is I worked. And I remember feeling so out of, like, it was not my environment. I didn't know what I was looking at books. His dad was like, if you want to buy a book, let's pick a book for you. And I was like, oh, no, I'm okay. I felt so weird. I didn't like it. And I resisted this feeling. I resisted this thing. It was so uncomfortable to me that they would be together as a family in this bookstore buying books. Like, such a normal, beautiful, awesome thing to do as a family that I had never experienced, ever. And it was jolting, and I didn't like it. And it is one of the things that led me to pulling away from and eventually breaking up with Joe or pushing him away until he broke up with me because it was foreign and and all the things. And I remember Joe saying, or his dad said to me, I can't remember. Joe told me that his dad said that, yeah, my dad said that he will always buy me books forever. As long as I'm reading, he will always buy me books. And I'm like, you're a 27-year-old dude. He was 27 at the time or 28 at the time. I'm like, buy your own books, is what I'm thinking. And God, how wrong was I? Because I just didn't know. I didn't know that as a parent, the ability to provide your child, no matter how old they are, something that they love and appreciate that is good for their mind and soul is such a gift to the parent to be able to do that. And there is no age expiration date when it comes to a parent and a child. And eventually, anywhere, anyhow, I don't care. I don't care how old she is. I don't care if she's read 7 books in one week. If she wants the eighth book, I'm getting it on Amazon and she gets it the next day. I will buy her books forever. I am so grateful that Joe and the Kendall family brought books into my life and that I've embraced them so much that we've carried this on with Lily and Sam. And I'm excited to go to bed tonight. And again, I don't watch shows, I read books. And I am going to pick up Rules